recording tonight's event, and it will be available to view again on the TCF website and our YouTube channel. Your presence here indicates your consent to the recording, and we're also streaming the event live on Facebook at the moment. Everyone will be muted. Please could you stay on mute? We would be really grateful if you do that. It's very important as we've got so many people, almost 200 people with us tonight. It's wonderful, but it could get noisy if anyone comes off mute. You might also want to switch your device that you're viewing this event on to speaker view. That means that you can only see the speaker rather than all the little squares of people. And you can do that usually in the top right-hand corner of your screen. On most devices, you'll find a toggle switch. It says view, and you can toggle between gallery and speaker view. And that way you'll only see the speaker if you go to speaker view. And just a final housekeeping point. We were hoping to have time at the end of the evening for you to share your ideas, your comments, your feedback. But due to time constraints and the numbers here, we unfortunately won't be able to have a kind of verbal discussion. But if you've got any comments or feedback, or you'd like to share your own coping strategies or ideas, please do so in the chat function. And you can use the chat function by clicking on chat, which is normally at the bottom of your screen, and typing in your comments in the box that comes up. That shares the chat with everyone. And you can also share a chat with one other person if you want to send a personal message. We may not have time to acknowledge or sum up or comment on any of your comments in the chat, but please know that we will share copies of the chat with our speakers tonight and with Gina, and we'll try to make them available on the YouTube recording if we can. So now with the housekeeping done, I'm going to hand over to Gina Claye, who will introduce the evening for us.
Hello everyone, I'm Gina Claye. My daughter Nikki died 34 years ago, age 19, from suicide, and my son Robin died 18 years ago, age 32, from an illness. You can imagine, the day after my daughter Nikki died, I had a phone call. It was from another bereaved mum, and she said, "You may not remember me, but I just wanted you to know that I've heard about what happened to Nikki, and our son died from suicide too. And I'm a teacher, and my husband's a head teacher. We are a normal family, and you are normal too." Well, I can't tell you how much that helped me. And then 6 months later, I went on a TCF retreat. And I was sitting on a settee, sitting back, cuddling a hot cup of tea, you know, the way you do, and sharing with another bereaved mum. And we chatted, and we talked about our children, we shared our grief. And at the end, she turned to me and hugged me and said, "Thank you so much. That's really helped." I thought, wow. There's me in my pitiful bereaved state, actually having helped somebody. But of course, it's all about sharing. And that's what I've tried to do in my book, I've tried with Knickers On, Surviving the Death of a Child, is sharing how I felt, how I survived, how I got through my grief journey, and how I got stronger and just survived it all and became what I am now and how I live now. Also, for me, you know, putting words down in poems or a book, I can control the words in all the chaos of grief. When you just don't know what's going on, you can't help what's happened. It's chaotic. But if you sit down, I sat down with a pen, and just for a short while, I was able to control the words. They had to do what I said. I couldn't control the past, what had happened, but I could put the words in order. And so I shared in the book. And I also wanted to talk about and to share how wonderful TCF is and how it helps, various ways it helps. Now, when I was first bereaved, I got books about losing a child, but I couldn't really read them because they went on page after page after page, most of them. So I thought, right, I'm not going to do that. So spaces between paragraphs, words in bold now and again, short articles. So that's what TCF is. It's what I call bite size. You can dip into it. And yeah, because originally I could only read sayings. And I put loads of them in my book as well. For example, you can't control the wind, but you can adjust the sails. Words of wisdom like that. And words of wisdom like this. If you feel you're about to go off the edge, remember, the world is round. So, well, there's 48 chapters in this book. So you see, they can't be long, can they, if there's 48 chapters? So we've got things like what helps us get up in the morning, upright with knickers on, going mad, which, well, I certainly did, going out in the car and screaming with the window open, how to get through coping with anniversaries and things like Christmas. The chapter of Christmas starts, I remember being in the supermarket and very nearly throwing a large cooking apple at the beaming Father Christmas when he opened his mouth to sing. Then there's exhaustion, because grief is exhausting, and craft, because just sharing what helps you. Writing helps me, craft helps other people, or painting, all kinds of things. Exercise, breathing, because when I was first bereaved, I would gasp like this. And sometimes just to share that it's difficult, not difficult to breathe really, it's so uptight, your breath doesn't come properly, and somebody has to make you aware of that. Then there's eating, and there's a good recipe in there as well. And then there's a chocolate meditation. There's a chapter entitled Chocolate, and one of them is a chocolate meditation. And it's me experimenting with doing a chocolate meditation, filling my mouth with chocolate, and then, oh well, you could read about that, couldn't you? It doesn't go to plan though. And then there's changing and growing, all kinds of things. I'm sharing how I felt, how I survived, how I kept going, carrying my children with me, and how eventually I grew. So those are my thoughts and feelings in the book, and many, many heartfelt and valuable contributions from our TCF members. And now I'm going to hand you over to Graham Foxley, Simon's dad.
Hello, everyone. I'm here tonight because Gina kindly picked one of my poems to go in her book. But now, here's the thing. I'm not a poet. I've never read poetry. I've never wanted to write poetry. Matter of fact, I don't even really like poetry. But in September 2011, when out of the blue we lost our son Simon, who was age 21, to suicide, that first night as I lay awake, just descending into a pit of despair, I was suddenly aware that there was words and phrases rattling around my head and trying to force themselves to rhyme. It was really strange. I got up and I wrote them down, and there was my first poem. It was called Silent Drums, because our son was a percussionist. I cried and cried over those words. very powerful. And then from then on, every time I descended into that pit, I seemed to go through what I named the rhyming zone, and the process would start again. It was very short poems, mostly 4 to 6 lines. I'll give you a quick example of an early one. Grief is such an evil beast, rips out your heart and on your insides he'll feast, stamps on your entrails as he stares into your eyes and gloats at the prospect of your tortured demise. Very short, sharp, powerful words. These were a lifeline for me because I wasn't really able to express those sort of thoughts and emotions, certainly not in polite conversation. But by reading those over again, I was able to purge some of those feelings, and even more, leaving them around for the rest of the family to read, I was able to give them some sort of insight into the turmoil that was going on behind Dad's poker face. So slowly, as my grief kind of rolled forward, some of the pits seemed less steep-sided, and 1 or 2 even bottomed out in the poetry zone. And I had some longer poems result. And the one in Gina's book, entitled The Snail, is one of those poems, and I'll read it for you now. A snail heaves its shell across my window pane. It carries a heavy burden. I do the same. Its load grew with it, had time to adapt. Mine arrived without warning, no time to react. At first, the weight crushed me. I sat crying every day. Slowly, I grew stronger. I managed to crawl a little way. As years passed, I struggled to be more like that person others wanted to see. They may not notice my slow, heavy tread, nor my exhaustion or tiredness of breath, nor days when the load become too heavy again, and I'd curl up and hide from family and friends. I looked for that snail. Where could it be? There was no snail, just a reflection of me. Not a complicated poem. Obvious it's about the burden of grief that we all have to carry and hide from the rest of the world simply because they can't handle it. That last line was a real shocker to me. I wasn't expecting it. That's a complex issue I had with my own reflection in mirrors. I don't know if anybody else has had it, but I couldn't really look into a mirror because I found the reflection disturbing and I didn't recognize myself. Yes, I'd grown a beard to cover a face that never smiled anymore, but that wasn't it. It was the eyes, that blank stare that soldiers bring back from war zones. Very shocking. So, do I still feel the same? Well, 9 years down the road, it's a definite yeah, but no, but yeah, but. Yeah, I still carry the burden of grief and always will, but I carry it more easily now. I suppose partly because the load had become lighter, but I think also very much because I've been getting stronger at carrying that load. After, I suppose 6 years, the poems dried up. I guess that the pits weren't deep enough to reach the rhyming zone anymore. So that's it, I suppose. I'll probably never write another poem. I won't be sad if I don't. It's a very painful process. So am I a poet? No, no longer anyway. Did I ever really write those? I'm really not sure. Am I a fake? Yeah, probably. On that note, I'll hand back to Gina.
Oh, thank you, Graham. Thank you. No, I think your poem just shows exactly, with the picture of the snail, shows how much burden the grief is. So thank you. Now we're going to have Gina Claye, Chloe's mum.
Hello, everybody. This poem that I read is called Just Making the Gravy, and it was for my daughter Chloe, who died on the 4th of August 2009, age 37. The first Christmas after you died, Alice said, "Mum, you don't have to do anything. We'll do it all. But can you just make the gravy?" "Of course," I said. "One small thing. I can manage that. I manage to make lists and order food and buy presents and wrap them and dig out the stockings and decorate the tree and even send a few cards." I stood by the hob. The champagne was being passed around. The grandchildren were happily weaving between our legs, clutching their presents and chirruping. I had my apron on, ready. Alice took the turkey out of the oven and put the roasting tin down in front of me. "Mum, can you just make the gravy? That's all you have to do." That's all I have to do. But I can't. I cannot move. I cannot lift my arm. I'm standing in front of the turkey, paralyzed, tears pouring down my cheeks. The first Christmas without you, I could not even manage the gravy. Oh, this is taking me back to how I felt, because it's just the beginning of 12 years since Chloe died in a road traffic accident. And it was as though that comfortable, well-worn rug of life, that you have under your feet and you're keeping going, is suddenly brutally ripped out from under us, sending us crashing into a black vortex of grief. And for our family, we would just about stagger to our feet, only to be knocked back again by another wave of desolation and shock. So when Gina asked me to think about that first Christmas, I got out the journal that I had decided to keep after Chloe died. And I reread it for the first time in 10 years. And it was so stark. It was so black and white. It was a real reminder of how stricken we were in those early years and those weeks and months. The pain was so raw. It was so visceral. The body and the mind were so leaden and heartbroken that really we could barely function at all. And on that first Christmas Eve, I wrote "Terrible day." Surges of deep despair and pain welling up in sobbing and groaning. Stomach tight and gripping. Cannot cope. Cannot complete the simplest thing. I had so little energy, I remember. I couldn't even manage to push down the tiny little presents into the Christmas stockings. Couldn't do it. And rereading those words of anguish, I just do remember how physically and mentally exhausting, as Gina said, grief is exhausting. Your life is shattered and you cannot function normally. And for somebody like me who always seemed to be in control of everything, it was so weird and so devastating. So I feel that we need people to support us by just holding us and allowing us to howl and cry if we need to, because tears are healing. They soften the tension in the body, which is so tight with grief. And we need people to let us know that that's how it is. it is normal to feel like this, and it is all right. And that's why I think being with other people, bereaved parents, is just the most healing thing. Because, for example, my daughter Alice took me very soon after Chloe had died to a compassionate friends meeting, and it was an absolute lifeline for me. For many months, all I could do was sit and cry through every meeting. And I just sat and cried throughout the meetings. But I felt totally accepted by the group. And this was one place in the outside world where I could cry. And I could talk about Chloe and know that everybody there understood and had been through it too. Yeah, grief feels like really tough work, but one faltering step at a time, it honestly does get less tsunami-like as time goes on. In fact, I'll just give you 3 examples. One day, I suddenly realized that I sat through a compassionate friends meeting and I hadn't cried. And then one day I realized that I was able to say Chloe's name without breaking down in tears. And then the day came when I actually chose to go to a gardening meeting instead of going to my normal TCF monthly meeting. And, you know, that for me in the early days of the grief would have been unthinkable, because that was my lifeline. That really kept me going with the family. So we did manage to get through those dark days, those darkest of days, and slowly, I think, like Graham said, you just do get stronger at carrying the grief. And slowly you find pleasure and laughter in life again, even though the sorrow will always be there. And the tears can still fall at unexpected times, but that devastating, raw anguish has been replaced by what I feel is like an accepting sadness of just what is. And on we go in life. We carry Chloe with us. It's forever stitched into our hearts. And she's there with us as our lives continue to unfold, woven in joy and woe, as Blake said.
Thank you so much, Jill. That was so powerful and so true. I know lots of people will really identify with that. Thank you. And now we're going to Rachel Claye, one of our siblings, who's Nikki and Robin's sister.
Hello there. Yes, so all of us who are speaking tonight have contributed to the book. We're asked to contribute to the book, partly to share our experience, partly to talk about what helps. But I was asked to provide a sort of siblings perspective. So I'm Rachel. I'm the youngest of 3 children. I lost both my siblings. My sister died when we were teenagers. My brother died just after I turned 30. From being the youngest, I've become the oldest, and it's not a position I ever wanted. I think grief is very different for children. Because it's happened to me twice, I understand that now. I didn't when it happened the first time. I think when you're a child, you don't have tools to process what's happening to you. The key thing I would say about grief in children from my own experience is that it's very frightening. Everything you think is certain disappears. Your parents change overnight. Your family changes shape. Your position and your role in the family change. You don't quite know who you are, and you don't know who you're supposed to be. It's a new landscape. You still go to school and you still look like a child. And I think that's the second big aspect, which I think is loneliness. You're not like your peers anymore. They don't understand. And you can't be carefree, which they can see, but they probably don't understand either, and they certainly can't help. I actually have my diary from that time. I was 14. Before Nikki died, the voice of the person who is writing is a fairly cheerful kid. And that's true, even though I knew she was very ill. She'd tried suicide and I was very afraid she would die. And there's a break of 3 months after Nikki died and the diary starts again. And it's the voice of an adult. Quite simply, it's a sudden leaving behind of childhood. And I think it's hard to understand all this when it's happening. And I certainly didn't as a child at the time. I think this is why people bereaved in childhood circle back to grief, something I've certainly done. Sometimes because understanding drops into place later as you go along. Sometimes because something that wasn't resolved or understood at the time is triggered and you go back to it with your new adult brain to try and understand it. Sometimes because you meet a milestone in your life, like having children or getting married, that brings a new aspect of the loss that you didn't know existed. I think when my brother Robin died, he was 32 and I was 30, and we'd lost Nikki, so we both knew how important we were to each other. And when I realised Rob was going to die, I thought it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable, but I also thought I knew about grief and what was coming towards me, and I felt a sense of dread about what was going to happen to me, about what my parents were about to go through again. To some extent, I did know. I wasn't fazed by how difficult Christmas and birthdays and Mothering Sundays are. I have the T-shirt. I don't want it, but I do. I already knew how hard it is to watch your parents grieve, how overwhelming that can be, and how hard it can be to disentangle yourself and find space to feel and recognize your own loss. I think I was able to protect myself better when Rob died, and do that just because I understood what was happening better, what my parents were going through and what they needed and what I needed. I think second time round, I also understood that sibling grief is different. It's a different bond. We grow up around each other, we shape each other. I think when you lose your sibling, it feels like you lose your identity in some ways. You lose your past. Who you were in the family vanishes. It can feel like losing yourself. You lose aspects of the future. It's like being together through the loss of your parents one day, which you expect. And for me, being the last one left of my birth family is my particular nightmare. One of the good things is that over the years, my parents and I have talked a lot about grief and a lot about death. When Nikki died, that was very hard. We were laying new territory on a completely new and terrifying map. The second time we had the landmarks, and in some ways, I think we supported each other better. We talked better. I feel I can say what I need to about death and grief to my parents now, and that feels like a real source of strength for me, actually. If I were to give advice, which you probably shouldn't because everyone's experience is so different, I would say having the difficult conversations really helps. I don't think I was prepared for how overwhelmed I would feel by losing them both. It was as if Nikki died all over again when Robin died. Two things really helped me. One was I saw a therapist, and that helped me find words to explore my grief as a child. The second thing is that as an adult, when I lost Rob, I realised I didn't have to sit alone with it. And I went in search of other bereaved siblings. There was nothing via TCF at the time, but I went to a TCF national gathering, and there happened to be 6 other bereaved siblings who'd come with their parents. We got together in a room just for 1 hour. For me, it was a real turning point. I was able to say what had happened, although I could barely say the words, but I did, and I was understood, and I'm sure it was similar for the others in that room. From there, I became involved in TCF, providing peer support for siblings. So we started with an overnight retreat, which became an annual thing, and now we have monthly online Zoom groups. I don't actually need those online Zoom groups anymore. I think grief has been, it's been part of my life since I was 14, and sometimes I'd quite like it not to be. But I never want to feel that lonely again. And I don't want anyone else to feel that lonely either. And I now know that you don't have to be that lonely. Grief is personal, and sometimes it's very, very solitary. But being understood is powerful medicine. For me, it helped transform a paralyzing experience into something I could live with. It made it possible to find a purpose again. And a couple of years after Rob died, I started my own family, which was really a triumph of hope over experience. And I also started writing, and I now write for theatre, and I love that. So there was life after death. It's different, and I'm different. Some of me is someone that Nikki and Robin would recognise. In other ways, I think I'd surprise them. I find my life now engaging and hopeful, and I still grieve because I still love. And I'm very grateful to everyone I've shared the road with along the way. So thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, very much. Now I'm going to ask Andrew Miller, Fabian's dad, to speak.
Good evening, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. Rachel, I'm really not sure how to follow that. That was quite incredible. Thank you for that. As someone who has an older son who goes through everything you said about being a sibling, that meant a lot to hear that. So Gina asked me to write something from the viewpoint of a man, and she stressed very much that I should do that, bearing in mind that I had lost Fabian, my son, I think then 4 or 5 years ago at that time, and given my involvement, TCF, in respect of both being a trustee but also being a volunteer. So I wrote it, and the words just poured out, basically, and I think too many words poured out. And if I read them all, you may not have an opportunity to hear from everyone. So I've abridged what is actually in Gina's book. I'm very grateful for Gina putting this in the book. I don't think Gina used the title that I gave her for it. So I'm going to give you the title that for this purposes, and I called it A Man's Journey to TCF and Beyond. When I was 12 years old, the band 10cc launched their most famous song, I'm Not in Love. Those of you who are old enough to remember that, it was a huge hit. At the time, I was not old enough to understand or even try to understand the lyrics, especially given that it was all about a man claiming not to be in love. But I do recall the most famous words very well. They were said or sung as a whisper. Big boys don't cry. Big boys don't cry. To a 12-year-old, that seemed a very sensible statement. Only babies and young children, and maybe older girls, cry, but certainly big boys do not cry. That was in 1975. Little did I know that some 40 years later, in 2015, I would discover just how much a big boy could cry when I lost my own little boy, my dearest Fabian. Fabian was 19 years old. This fact of tears is nothing new to any bereaved parents. The tears that you never knew were there come from nowhere and seem endless. It doesn't matter if you're a mum, a dad, a sibling, those tears come. And yes, big boys do cry. But in the case of men, those tears often stop or are consciously stopped all too soon. Because in the end, men are not supposed to cry, not supposed to show their feelings, not supposed to be emotional, the emotional one. That often appears to be the general belief that abounds. But no one made those rules, or even if they did, it's unlikely that they had ever lost a child or a sibling. And so I was one of those men, not quite sure how I should be reacting, what I should be doing or saying, how I should be behaving with my family, friends, work colleagues, or with the world in general. Some 5 months passed since losing Fabian, and I found myself attending my first TCF meeting. And what did I notice first? There were 18 people in that group, a large group, but only 4 men. I was told it was a very good turnout for men that week. Sometimes they only had 1 or 2, and many times no men at all. Apparently that was normal. Men did not engage as much with TCF as women, all to do with emotions, or lack of them, or the inability to show them. It was all a bit confusing. Anyway, I sat down in this sea of bereaved parents, and I sat and I listened, and I shed a tear, and I got to tell my story. That meeting actually changed my grief journey. Something happened at that meeting that sent me on a new path. In the past 5 months, I felt that I understood what it was like to have lost a child. In my naivety, when I entered the room, the one thing I had assumed was that we were all on the same wavelength or understanding. As I sat there listening to the many stories being told by so many parents about their child and their child loss, my naive thought was shattered. I had lost Fabian to drugs. I had some understanding of that loss, how it happened, what it was like going through the process, how terrible it was to find Fabian on that tragic day. But I had no comprehension of what these other parents had been through. I had no idea what it was like to lose a child to cancer or a road accident, or to medical malpractice, or to suicide, or to a freak accident. I knew only my loss. But what I realized at that meeting was that for all of us, what had brought us to be sitting together in this TCF support group was the cause of our child or sibling's death. But what kept us together and bonded us and made us able to rely on each other was not the cause of the death, but our joint loss of a child or sibling. Very quickly, I realized that it was all about the loss of our children and siblings. For me personally, the loss is far more significant than the cause of Fabian's death. I've been involved at TCF for the last 5 years as a trustee and a volunteer. And at the retreats, I've taken the men's grief group, as it's now called. It took over 40 years for that, after being called the dad's group for quite a number of years. The men's group is very different from all other support and discussion groups that I have attended. Firstly, there are no women-only groups. So why the need for a male-only group? Well, it comes back to the beginning, to the very beginning, that big boys don't cry. Even in these modern times, men and women deal with the loss of their child and sibling in many different ways. When I run the group, I normally seek to run through with the group the possible differences that they may have noticed if they're in a marriage or a partnership. How and why has it been different? There can and there often are many and varied answers to this, but often there is silence. I've seen that men do not always realize that they are dealing with their grief in a different way to their wife or partner, or do not think of it as being as anything out of the normal. But what does tend to be a constant in the men's group is how men initially react to being asked to talk about how they are doing generally since the loss of their child or sibling. There is more often than not one of two responses to this question. The first is an annoyance of the issue. Men often do not like to talk about how they are coping. Or by contrast, men like to stress that they are fine, really fine, and that they are there for the rest of the family. The groups normally follow the same pattern, at least at the beginning of the meetings. This normality that men have created, this behavioral norm, is always expressed, but at some point it seems to disappear. As if by magic, the group allows or gives men permission to move away from their perceived norm, from their comfort zone, and to find both who they are and sometimes who they want to be. There comes a point in the men's group when the men simply start to express their feelings to each other. The initial embarrassment is gone, and the truth comes out. I've seen this happen each and every time, and for some it is as if by magic that they have been allowed to speak and be heard. But it is nothing to be surprised about, and in reality, it is not magic. What I have seen is simply the power of TCF being the means by which people can come together and talk about their loss. The fact that society has, at least in the past, expected or encouraged men and women to express themselves in different ways has not changed the basic fact that a man will grieve just as much as a woman for the loss of a child or sibling. The men's group therefore offers them a place to grieve and express their grief exactly as they feel it and without any judgment. The men's group allows men who have lost a child or sibling to be just that, a man who has lost a child or sibling. There is, of course, no magic. It is the most normal thing in the world, but for that short time, it often feels like magic. I do hope that society's attitudes in respect of men and bereavement are changing, as I think they are. Men are encouraged to be more open, to talk about their feelings, and hopefully they will. Indeed, over the last 3 years, I've seen a greater engagement of men with TCF in general. The future for bereaved men being able to express themselves more openly is therefore promising. But whatever happens, there remains the strong support of TCF, which is equally open and available to both men and women. And at our retreats, there will always be the men's group, which offers bereaved men a chance to go where they have not allowed themselves to go before. Thank you, Gina, for allowing me to read that today.
Oh, thank you very much, Andrew. That was very moving and so important to say. Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Terry Ahern, James's dad.
Thank you, Gina. Thank you, Gina, and thank you, Andrew. That was very insightful indeed. So I'm Terry Ahern, and I lost my son James in a road traffic accident just over 6 years ago. He was aged 22, and he was our only child. So Gina knew I was a keen walker. I lead walks at the retreats and in London for TCF. And Gina kindly asked me to write an article on walking for her lovely book. Since losing James, walking has been a godsend to me. Walking in a group or alone, or a combination of both, brings comfort and enjoyment. We are often told that walking is good for our physical and mental well-being. This is even more important when trying to cope with the loss of a child. We need to look after ourselves. In the early days, when I was finding it difficult to sleep, I found that being tired after a walk made it easier to rest. Being close to nature brings me closer to James. I find the term walking meditation very true. If I'm looking at buildings or places of interest, this occupies my thoughts, and I love to learn new facts. Walking can be a social experience too. Talking about the walk, the weather, and what you see is an easy conversation and avoids difficult topics. Of course, walking with other bereaved parents gives another layer of comfort. It means everyone can relax, talk freely about their children and their feelings. So that was my article. And to go on from there, I'd just like to say, in the months after James died, when I felt able to open the front door again to go outside, I came up with the idea of Jamie pilgrimages. I could plan walks incorporating places which featured in his life. On one such Jamie pilgrimage, I walked to the top of Primrose Hill in London. I know it was a favourite spot of his. I hadn't been there for years. But now I stood where he stood and looked at the view that he looked at. Lost in my thoughts, my gaze drifted towards words etched into a stone wall. They were the words of the poet William Blake. I have conversed with the spiritual son. I saw him on Primrose Hill. I paused and thought, how wonderful. In my mind, I changed the word S-U-N to S-O-N to become my spiritual son. So James, you are still my son. You are my spiritual son. It felt as though this verse had been put there for me, and I'd been guided there. The crushing burden of my grief had eased a little. I felt a sense of hope. 6 years on, I still grieve for James. I miss him so much. The enormity of losing him can still overwhelm me. The triggers are still there, but what has eased is the pain. I manage, I cope. In this changed world we now live in, with restrictions, walking has become more popular. Its benefits now more important to more people. As wonderful as a nice walk may be, for us, bereaved parents and siblings, our walks can be much better. Apart from the obvious health benefits, for us, a walk can heal. It can be uplifting. It can be spiritual. And above all, enable us to think deeply and clearly, connecting with our child, brother, or sister. Now is one of the best times to go walking. The dark and cold of winter is almost behind us. Early spring, when James was born, is a time of new life, of hope. I went walking recently in a country park near where I live and took note of the sights, sounds, and smells so I could share my experience with you. The sky is ice blue, the air fresh, but now with a little warmth from the sun, a promise of better times to come. A couple of crows caw and land on the bare branches of a mighty oak. It must be hundreds of years old. It was there before me and will be there long after me. The sound of a stream cascading over rocks is so pleasant as its crystal clear water flows into the lake, where a swan glides majestically by. I can smell flowers. Bright colours are once again flooding the landscape. The yellow of daffodils, a sure sign of spring. Blossom has started to appear on trees, white and pink. I hear birds singing. A sense of peace comes upon me. I breathe deeply, in through the nostrils, fill the lungs, then exhale through the mouth. After several deep breaths, my mind is clear. I know this is a meditation technique and it works. Now I think deeply of my beloved son and speak with him. A shaft of sunlight breaks through an enormous cloud, a stairway to heaven. Later, a small white feather flutters from above and lands in front of me. I look up. I can't see a white bird or any bird. Where did the feather come from? A sign from James? I'll take it. So, with the spring in my step, I keep going, one foot in front of the other, one step at a time. Isn't this what we try to do after our child, brother, or sister dies? If I may, Gina, I'd like to close by saying a few words about the Compassionate Friends London walks. We plan a series of monthly walks during spring and summer. They are approximately 5 miles long at an easy pace around green spaces and places of interest. They were suspended last year due to the pandemic restrictions, but we hope to be able to restart when it's safe to do so. Because we are all bereaved parents and siblings, it is a safe place to be. You can walk and talk with other members of the group, or walk on your own if you prefer, or a combination of both. I've had the privilege to meet the most wonderful people on these walks. For some, our walks have been the first contact with compassionate friends, an easier option to attending a meeting perhaps. So when the time is right, if you'd like a nice day out in London, in the best company, please join us. You will be most welcome. So to finish, whether you're upright with knickers on or upright with boxers on, pull on a pair of comfy shoes and enjoy a walk. It will help. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Terry. And I do hope you can start your walks again before too long.
Thank you, hopefully.
Yes. Now we're going to hear from Kelly Cooper, Cameron's mum.
Good evening, everyone. If you'll forgive me, I'm going to read my contribution, first of all, directly from the book. Before I lost my son, Cameron, my only child, to a cancerous brain tumour at the age of 13, I only needed to look at a plant and it would die. What happened after was a bit of a miracle. Online, I ordered some rose seeds that you could name and register. So they were registered as Cameron Rose. I did not expect much from past performance, but to my surprise, they grew into beautiful roses. I was delighted that I had managed to nurture these tiny seeds, and it gave me great pleasure to see them bloom repeatedly. So I embarked on a project to renew my garden. Being outside alone with my thoughts Gardening seemed to give me an inner peace. I had not felt this before. If a plant died or didn't work properly, I shrugged it off and tried something else. Now my garden is my pride and joy, and I cannot wait for the spring and the summer months to arrive for me to get out there again. I look forward to visiting our local garden show with the colours that I now appreciate so much. Just to sit in the garden with a cup of tea, the sun on my face, with time to breathe and think of Cameron is just wonderful. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm no expert. I don't know the names of flowers. I don't even really know what I'm doing. But I seem to think that I'm closest to Cameron when I'm out in the garden, and he's with me, maybe helping me. Locally, when I'm out gardening and people walk past me, they compliment me on my garden and say how wonderful it always looks, and especially the roses. Fortunately, I also planted a tree in Cameron's memory, and this does actually blossom around about the time of his birthday, generally speaking in April, and it's just starting to show signs of blooming now. Also, the garden show that I referred to tends to happen each year around about the time of his anniversary, which was a bit of a godsend, really. I lost Cameron just coming up for 10 years ago now, and I've always struggled with what to do on the anniversary. And I've tried several different things, but the one year that really helped me was when the garden show actually fell right on the day of his anniversary. The sun was shining, we walked around the garden show, picked up flowers, strongly influenced by Cameron. Red was his favourite colour. And as I said, I don't know the names of flowers, don't know what I'm picking up, but if I see something and I like it, I buy it and I give it a go. I don't put myself under too much pressure. Gardening should not be a chore, but a pleasure to go out there when I want to potter around and be alone with Cameron. So actually, I'm not alone at all. And one final thing, just to show you how much Cameron has influenced me in my garden, we had a shed built, and Cameron's favourite programme was Doctor Who, and we've actually painted the shed to look like the TARDIS, and it's definitely bigger on the inside. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Kelly, very much. I think lots of people will find gardening really helpful, and particularly in this lockdown. I know that I've always found gardening really, really helpful, especially after losing Nicky and Robin. You know, we bought a rose after Nicky died called Compassion, and it is still blooming 34 years later. It's a pink one, it's beautiful. And I think that, well, I think you've reached out to lots of people there, Kelly. Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Anne Bray, Jess's mum.
Thank you, Gina. Hello, everyone. After I was widowed, my daughter Jess was my primary support. She was a joy to be with. She enjoyed life. She loved caring for people and was a good listener. Even in her early 20s, she was wiser than her years and generous in so many ways. Less than 9 years on from losing my husband, she was gone too, age 29. Like her dad, she had cancer. Less than 2 years before Jess died, I'd relocated from Hampshire to Cornwall to live near Jess and her husband. The rest of my family and my close friends were far away. This was another devastating loss. I knew I had a very tough time ahead. I decided to do all that I could to look after myself, at least until I regained some peace and confidence. In some ways, this felt like a very self-centered approach, but it also felt like the best way I could think of to keep going, to survive, to be there for my son and my son-in-law and others. And I came across a list that I kept on a piece of paper on my iPad stand so that I could see it often through the day. Just take a moment to have a look at it, to remind myself and check in. It wasn't so much a to-do list. I couldn't manage that, especially in the early months. It was more about how to get through list. It was headed, look after yourself, 10 points. Celebrate small things. Celebrate big things. Don't compare. Make time for exercise. Eat well. Look for the good. Stop being so hard on yourself. Have some rest and don't feel guilty about it. Give yourself a pat on the back and go to bed early. Those 10 points on my list seem to fall into 3 groups: looking after my body, my physical needs, and another group recognizing what I've done rather than what I've left for another day, and also being aware of how I feel. How am I mentally just right now? Do I need to go gently for a while, or can I try taking next steps? So now I walk every day, I practice yoga, I cook, and I eat well, even though I live alone. I celebrate the small things. I'm upright with Knickers on, especially on the toughest days. And I celebrate the big things. More recently, I've been able to do things differently. I've had to really, but also trying new things or having a go at a task that I've been putting off. Even making new friends, taking up a new activity. Perhaps not so much now, nearly 3 years on, but I still go through the day, taking a moment to check in with myself, ask myself, am I being kind to myself? Am I expecting too much? Am I being myself? Now, that's a really tough one. But with the help of a trusted friend who's a very good listener, who happens to share my deeply rooted Christian faith, I've come to see that judging is tiring and it's usually not helpful to compare. We're all different, we're all unique, we do things differently. And our circumstances are so different. Our experiences are different. So I'll do what works for me. And I try to notice when I'm judging others. And when I feel judged, I try to let that go. At the end of each day, I take a few moments to sit and review the day, which I find helpful. And I look for what's gone well, perhaps what's been difficult. Again, just checking in. But the point which I use most of all is to look for the good, to look for things I'm grateful for. And I made a reference to this in the piece which Gina included in the book. It was referring back to just before I wrote the piece that I sent to her. I'd been at my first TCF gathering, the residential weekend at Amadown in Somerset, just a bit more than 2 years ago. And as I said to her, meeting everyone was a great support. There were so many different elements that were helpful. And I'd like to share with you a particularly poignant moment. When we gathered to remember our children at the candle lighting on Saturday evening, the music played was Spiegel in Spiegel by Arvo Pärt. My daughter Jess was an accomplished violinist, and played that piece at her brother's wedding. It was difficult to listen and to know that I will never hear her play again. But also it reminded me of a very happy day that we spent together as a family. Turning my thoughts around from what's not so good, what's sad, what's so difficult to live with, to being grateful is getting easier. Remembering what I do have as well as what I've lost, thinking of things I take for granted and so much that I have that others don't have is something I do often. I'm grateful for family and friends, including the ones who don't understand. How could they? Jess taught me so much and I miss her constantly, but she may never have been part of my life, and I'll always be proud of who she was and how she lived her 29 years. That relationship and our time together was the most precious gift that may never have been given. And I'm so grateful to have found CCF, a place to share my grief with others who understand, who listen, who offer hope and practical support. And I want to give back, to reach out. This contact with others expands my world, gives me opportunities to listen, to remember, all the time reminded that I'm not alone. Over time, as my resilience builds, I have a growing sense of peace. My confidence grows. Good memories of Jess stay with me. And the painful ones of her devastating illness are fading and less frequent. So now I'm more aware of how I am and who I am. I'm okay and I'm me, and that's good enough. There's a wonderful quote in the most recent Compassion magazine that I've just finished with. Havelock Ellis wrote, "All the art of living lies in a fine mingling of letting go and holding on." And that's just what I feel I'm doing. I'm learning to let go, to take a day at a time, pausing often to take a moment to be grateful for what I have and for what I've learned about what really matters in life. Love and compassion for our others and for ourselves. Thank you, Gina, for this opportunity to share some thoughts.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I think that the self-help that you so well expressed is so important. And also, I'm me, that's okay, that's enough. Be yourself, yes. And in fact, there is a saying in the book, it says, be yourself, everyone else is taken. So that is what my book, Upright with Knickers On, is all about. It is sharing. Sharing, like you've heard today, from these wonderful, wonderful contributors. Many, many other contributions, all about, well, everything you can think of to do with grief, really. I think it helps you understand why you're feeling as you do, and however you're feeling is okay. And you're not alone in feeling the despair, the madness, not wanting to get up in the morning, what we call post-traumatic stress. It's all there. It's all shared. And this book tells you that you're not alone. And it also gives ways that people have coped, but not only coped, have grown. They've carried on, carrying their children or their siblings with them. And they've grown and survived, and quite many people now are making a difference, just like our wonderful volunteers and our wonderful CEO, Carolyn. And we can all do that. We can all do that because sharing is healing. And I know that I personally feel that through these 34 years of grief, and this long grief journey, I have learned so much, met so many people that I've shared with. And I can honestly say that sharing grief is finding hope. And that's what the book is. Upright with Knickers On, surviving the death of a child, sharing grief and finding hope. And if you read it, I do hope that you will feel that you're not alone and that you will become yourself in the future. Thank you very much.
Gina, shall we? We've got a few minutes, so it might be nice to hear from our audience.
Yes.
Just perhaps in the spirit of the book, if there are things that have helped you along your grief journey, you might want to put them in the chat and I'll try and read them out. But also if you've got any specific questions for our speakers or for Gina, we've got about 10 minutes where we can take questions. And again, if you're able to put them in the chat, I'll give you a few minutes to do that, a minute or two. I'll try and field them so we can hear from you. Oh, we've got a very good question here. Where can we get the book from, please? Good question. You can get the book from the Compassionate Friends website at www.tcf.org.uk/shop or /books, in fact. And you'll find it there. It's £10, including postage and packing. And all proceeds go to Compassionate Friends. Oh, Claire's mentioned, I've found painting, stones and paintings so helpful. Time to sit and be creative. Something that Annalise loved to do, and I have felt close to her with all the things I've created. And I do know that, you know, craft and memorial type work is really, we do a lot of that at our retreats. And I remember the first time I went to one of our retreats and there was a craft room, I thought, that's not me, I'm not crafty. And actually it's just wonderful to go and sit and just make something and sit alongside others. And we just chat about our children and their favourite colour and their favourite TV programme and the instruments they played and stuff. It's wonderful. It's a lovely way to talk about our children.
Carolyn, sorry, there's a question there about whether there's a retreat for men.
Yeah, can you let us know when there will be a retreat, especially for men? I really would like to share this for my husband. At the moment, we don't have a specific retreat plan, especially for men, but it's a really good idea. But we always at our retreats have, as Andrew said, special men's groups. And we always do those right at the beginning of our retreat, usually, so that the men can get together straight away. But I agree, it would be wonderful to have a men's retreat. Yeah, because we're peer-to-peer support, we rely on volunteers to do the supporting, if you like, to be at the retreat. So we would need a number of men who are prepared, bereaved men who are prepared to come and run a specific retreat for men, but it's definitely something to think about. Thank you. If you spot any more questions, Rachel. Susan said, I did a course on how to meditate. I tried to do myself, but struggling. So going on a short retreat really helped me with this. I find it helps when emotions are overwhelming. Thank you, Susan. Oh, here's a lovely one. I have found it really helpful to make cushions using some of my little girls' clothes and given one to each of the family, aunts, uncles and cousins. At the Click Sergeant Parents Coffee Mornings, the real talk happens when we sit around the table crafting, but really talking about our children. Yeah, thank you.
Can I mention something?
Yes.
I do remember on the first weekend retreat, TCF residential retreat that I went on, they had a crafting workshop. And I remember going and I remember feeling very anxious. And we were told to draw or represent how we were feeling. And everybody did completely different things. And I just slam banged and slashed and painted, and it was all very dark, very black. And then we had to sort of share with everybody what we had done, and other people in the little group around the table could say anything about what you had done. But I remember just when I was talking about mine, I literally lifted up the painting and I literally tore it into shreds. I just shredded the whole painting and just dropped it on the table. That's how I was feeling, just absolutely. And then the most amazing thing happened, because there was just like sort of a quiet silence. And then one of the people said, I'd like to share with you what I feel about what you've just done. And she gathered all the pieces and she put them all together again. She sort of made what I'd done whole. And she said, I think maybe I'd like to share that this will happen one day. And it was just so wonderful for me that somebody could respond like that in such a empathetic and unjudgmental, but really hopeful way. She gathered all my devastatingly angry shreds and she just calmly collected them and put them together again. It was an amazing, amazing healing time in that workshop for me. Never forgotten it. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Jill. Very powerful. Thank you.
Carolyn, can I say something? Because it's really interesting to hear what everyone does and what's helped them. And I have to say, and I know there's a lot of people on here like me, what helped us was actually becoming volunteers and doing what had been done for us. And we are always, I don't think I did say it, I'm on the trustees, I'm actually the chair of the trustees at the moment. TCF is always looking out. We have amazing, wonderful volunteers. And we're always looking out for volunteers. Not everyone can do it, not everyone wants to do it. But if it is something that you have thought about, then please do drop you a line, Carolyn?
Yes.
And think about it. And I actually saw today on LinkedIn something which really summed it up for me. And it said, the most precious and valuable thing that a person can do is to give their time to someone else, because that's time they can never get back for themselves. And I think that's really, being a volunteer has helped me so much. It helped me as much as sitting there and other volunteers helping me. So please do think about it. And as I am a trustee also, I'm going to say this. This has been the most amazing meeting. I think we had over 180 people here today. We need everyone, volunteers, members, everyone. And what I would ask is, if you are able to, thank you to all those who have made a contribution. If you're able to make a contribution to charity, then please do, because any amount is received absolutely gratefully, and you can see that it is put to good cause and good causes all the way through. Most of what we do is done by volunteers, but as a charity, of course, we have to have the administration for that, and we have to run it. So we're no different from any other charity. So please, if you're able to encourage friends, family, please do. And please do remember that there is no amount that's too small. Any donation is really, really gratefully received. And thank you all so much. As wearing my trustee and shares hat, thank you so much for attending. It's quite amazing. And Gina, thank you for being you, because you are absolutely incredible. You were one of the first people that I met at my second TCF event, and I remember you giving me your book, I think your first book, and really not understanding why this person was giving me this book. I was only a few months bereaved, and it's your poems, and I still today get so much out of them. So I'm sure I'm by far not the only one here who wants to say a huge thank you, because you have been a constant for me throughout every TCF event. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. Oh.
Just to mention, the name of that book of poems is Don't Let Them Tell You How to Grieve. Is that correct?
Correct.
Is it also available through TCF?
Yes, it is. I've just put the link in the chat.
Great.
You'll be able to buy both those books, both of Gina's books and some other books too. So I think we'll end now, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. First of all, to all of you for attending, but most importantly, to all our fantastic speakers. It's not easy to go back to those dark days of early grief, and also to reflect upon that. And I think you'll agree that all our speakers, Terry, Jill, Kelly, Andrew, Graham, Anne and Rachel, have just done an amazing job at sharing their thoughts and feelings. And thank you very much to Gina as well for pulling the book together, and for hosting our time together so brilliantly. We all hope that you found some thoughts and feelings that you could relate to, and that will help you in the days and weeks and months ahead, however far into your journey of grief that you are. Just also a reminder again that copies of Upright with Knickers On are available on our website, and I've put the link in the chat. And as you found out, the book is in lovely sort of bite-sized chunks, and it explores the practical ways of coping with loss, lots of ideas on what can help us in our journey of grief. It's one of the easiest books to read, and because of the small chapters and the bite size. So it's really the book that I wish I'd had actually when my daughter died 16 years ago. I just wanted to tell you about our next online event that we'll be hosting. We'll be welcoming Jane Undian. Jane is the founder of an organisation, a charity called the Bereavement Journey. It's an organisation that offers groups where grievers can come together to share, a bit like our own support groups, but for a number of different grievers, not just for siblings or bereaved parents. She's also the trustee of the organisation called At a Loss, which is like an umbrella organisation, signposting organisation. Jane was awarded the MBE for services to the bereaved in the Queen's New Year's Honours list in 2020. She had a very long career in supporting bereaved people. After the loss of her son, helping the bereaved to find hope became a passion for Jane. And that's what she's going to be talking about, finding hope after the death of a child. She'll be sharing her story and her reflections on the losses in her own life, including the loss of her son. She'll also be sharing with us the learning and wisdom she's derived from many bereaved people she's worked with over her long career and experience with the bereaved. And you can find more information and to register for Jane's talk on our website, www.tcf.org.uk/finding-hope, and I'll put it in the chat in a minute. So finally, thank you warmly for being with us tonight. It's been a hugely effective, I've found it really affecting actually, hearing everyone tonight. Please remember that you're not alone, as Andrew said. You're not alone, or as Gina said. Remember that our helpline is there. Our volunteers are all bereaved parents. They're there to listen and support. So please, when you want to speak to another bereaved parent, give our helpline a call. We're running online support groups for different types of loss and different life experiences, like for lone parents, for parents who've lost their only child or all their children. So please check those out on the website. They're under events. Many of our local groups are running online, and hopefully we'll be back in person later this year when it's safe to do so. Our Facebook groups, private Facebook groups, are a place where you can share with others, join up, and you know, you can talk to others. And remember, for those of you who who are in the first 2 years of loss, we have a befriending scheme called the Grief Companion Scheme. And if you're in an area where you don't have any local support from TCF, then we may be able to find you a grief companion. And equally, if you're more than 3 or 4 years bereaved and you would like to start off volunteering with TCF, a grief companion role might be a way to get started on that volunteering with us. And then finally, obviously, hopefully later this year, we'll get back to our retreat weekends, which you've heard quite a lot about tonight, and be able to meet in person again for the weekend. So thank you warmly for being with us tonight. Please go gently. Take care of yourselves for the rest of this evening and for the next few days. And a very good night to you all. Thank you. Please leave the meeting whenever you are ready.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.